Welcome everybody. This is the Helm Dev Weekly Call for Thursday, July the 18th, 2019. So we're going to roll like this. We'll start off first with announcements, then we'll go to stand-ups for the core maintainers, and then for anybody in the community that would like to say a few words. Then we'll head into discussions, and then we'll finish off with assignments for the week coming up. So without further ado, let's hit the announcements. So I'll probably hand over to Matt Fisher for the Helm Summit update.
Yeah, so the co-chairs have been busy. We were last week or the week before, we were doing CFP reviews and final assembly of the schedule. Oh, last week was final assembly of the schedule. The week before was CFP reviews. So we've been working together with some event co-organizers over at the Linux Foundation to help us with the assembly of the actual schedule and putting that on a site. So now, if you look inside the Helm minutes in the notes, the site for the schedule for Helm Summit is now available. I think that was made public either yesterday afternoon or it was made public yesterday or today. But that's now available. You can go and see what's on the schedule. So I'm going to be going on Twitter and I'll be announcing different things about that and just kind of promoting those things. So the next steps for the co-chairs in particular is that we're taking a look now. I think next week we are looking, and even probably starting into early next week, is the diversity scholarships. So we have to review that as part of our responsibilities. And then we're also talking with other vendors who are interested in sponsoring the event. So if you know of any sponsors that might be interested in sponsoring the event, please let me know, or please let any of the other co-chairs. I believe that's Michelle, who is not, oh, Michelle's here on the call, nice. And then also Priyanka, who's from GitLab, and Reinhard, who is one of the charts maintainers. So we're on the co-chair committee. So you can message us if you want to talk about sponsorships. Aside from that, that is all we have on the Helm Summit update. So book your travel. It's time.
Thank you, Matt. So that's in September the 11th of 12th in Amsterdam. Yes. I think that's correct. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So on to the next announcement, 2.14.2 eventually got released. We had logistical issues going across the Atlantic, but we got there in the end. So thanks to Taylor and anybody else that helped to get that release out the door. Okay, before I move on, any announcements that I might have forgotten or not put out? Okay, we'll move on to the stand-ups, and I'll start at the very end when I'm looking here. Matt Fisher, you might as well go ahead.
Sure. So yeah, this last week has been doing co-chair committee stuff and then HRE related stuff. So nothing necessarily coding review, but I've been taking a look now. I was pairing with Adam and Taylor just on some of the things that we have been working on for Helm 3. So that's mostly what I've been looking at, is reviewing what's in the issue queue and what's in the PR queue, and just trying to see, are we feasible to release an Alpha 2 sometime soon? And it looks like we're very, very close. If not, we're ready to release for the next Alpha. So now what I've been doing is also taking a look at what do we want to have in for the next beta. So that's what I've been taking a look at, is just release planning for the next Helm 3 release. So,
and just to clarify, Matt, there, so there's just going to be an Alpha 2 and then we're going to go to beta, is that correct?
Yeah, so the release schedule kind of looks like anything that is significant feature, or it sounds like when we're looking at any of the major features, and Alpha is kind of defined as anything that is a major breaking change, or anything that is like new functionality or any major refactorings. So that typically goes into an Alpha. And then when you go into a beta, that's kind of a signal that you're trying to, that's all the major functionality that's in there, and now you're just going in doing bug fixes and fixing things that has either like regressions that have been introduced or whatnot. So in identifying what are the major refactorings that need to be done, there's like the Helm, like the kubectl, not the kubectl apply, but like the three-way diff logic is something that's been a major refactoring that we're going to have to take a look at the next release. And then there's a couple of other things that break backwards compatibility. So those make sense to put into an alpha release. But once beta 1 is released, those are basically a signal to say that all the major functionality that we're finished with is done. And so now we're just taking a look at things like the namespace flag not working, or small bug fixes here and there that are like, these are things that we intend to fix before we go into a 3.0 final. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I will pass it along to Scott.
Okay, I'll be quick because I have nothing to report for this week since the last one. Yeah, there was a charts chat, I guess I should say, where we did, there was an informal one, I think I missed the last one, where we talked about reprioritizing some of the helpers that we had discussed since before KubeCon Europe. For example, the tool to help automatically deploy a repo, a Helm repo. So I'm planning to get back into that soon, but I don't have any progress since last week.
Do you want to?
Oh, sorry. So I guess Butcher? Yeah.
I'm afraid I'll forget everything I have to say. Yeah, I was a couple minutes late because I was booking my travel to Helm Summit this morning, so I'm super excited about that. So on the organization side, we formally kicked off the first phase of the security audit for Helm 3. As those of you who have been following along at home know, this is the last hurdle that we have to pass before we graduate to be a full CNCF project. So I'm really excited about that. Had a meeting with Luke Perkins from CNCF and Karen Chu, who's been the community manager for Helm since the beginning, and we got that all started off. Bridget Krumalt has joined our team officially now as a PM for our internal team, and she has started looking at the documentation. She and Luke and Ronan, who did all the design work, are all looking at the documentation and trying to figure out what should change and how things should change. So if you're really interested in the next phase of the documentation for Helm, they should be kicking off some work fairly soon on that one. Also very exciting. And we will be following the Kubernetes pattern for how they do documentation in order to enable translations into other languages and stuff like that. So we worked on that a little bit this week. The project Helm file has sort of reached out to find out if we would be interested in having Helm file join the official Helm org as a project. They're still kind of exploring what their options are, but I let them know that we would be open to discussing that. So the Helm org maintainers would be involved in making that call if that were something they were interested in. So we might be hearing more about that in the next couple of weeks. And the last one was, I can't remember what the last one was. Yeah, I'll remember it later and type it into chat. I'll pass it on to, who's the next Matt who hasn't gone? Farina?
Sure, mine's super easy. I haven't done much except some reviews of pull requests and things like that and merge some stuff into the hub. Otherwise, it's been mostly just reviews and feedback. That's it. Nothing exciting. Adam. Adam?
I can't take notes and give my stand-up at the same time. Can't split my brain that way. Yeah, so this week I got caught up on a few PR reviews, as well as talked with Taylor about some apply stuff and some of the other stuff he's working on. Today I'm looking at splitting out my feature into separate pull requests, primarily pulling out the namespace fix to get that in. That way we'll at least have that in for the next alpha release. I believe that's it for this week. Let's see. Who has not gone?
Michelle.
Michelle.
I'm just catching up from after coming back from a 2-week vacation. One of the first things I did was reviewed Jacob's Helm test proposal. So there is now an alternate proposal for Helm test. The big change was removing the test functionality from the hook system. And I've been having conversations with Jacob, and I've basically been convinced that his perspective as an end user is really a good, or his suggestion as an end user is a really good approach to take. I think he's going to go over that proposal later in this call, but it's something that we should look into and discuss if this is feasible for the next alpha, or if we need another alpha to support this. If we do go through his proposal, I did evaluate it, and it seems like we would just be removing the test failure hook and then modifying the current test success hook annotation. That would be like the minimal amount of work that we need to do to get that feature completed, as well as removing the cleanup flag. And so if we did that and put that in an alpha, I think that would be enough of a foundation for us to build the rest of the features that he suggested on top of that. So that's something to talk about later in this call. And that's going to be my focus for the next few days. Who hasn't gone?
Taylor, I think.
I was working on the past week, just getting the atomic stuff ported over. That is now merged in, and reviewing a few PRs. Like I said, working with Adam currently. I'll be working with him on the apply stuff here in the next week or two, and I'm also just trying to, before we get out of the alpha phase, shave off some of the rough edges around using Helm as a Go client library. Yeah, I have that as a discussion item that we'll get to. And I think that is it from my end. So just working on different Helm 3 things and porting things over. And I think I was the last one. So Martin, back to you.
Okay, is that everybody, just in case? Okay. So this week I eventually got back to, so we cut the release, the tail end of last week for 2.14.2, and then I got back to looking at the migration stuff. So that's kind of my tie-in with you as well, Taylor, because I'm using the as a Go library, for want of a better word. So both from a V2 and a V3 perspective. So I've been working through that and going through dependency hell. So thanks to a few people that I had to bounce dependency stuff off of, and yeah, I've come out of it a little bit mentally disturbed and stuff after my dependency hell, but hey, we're still going. So yeah, so that's fun. So on a serious note, I might be able to feed back into the work you're trying to do, because obviously I'm a consumer on this side, so that might be okay. So what I hope to do is try and sometime next week get in something around a proposal and so forth on that. So I'll see how that goes as I hook into it more and more. And apart from that, then it was the usual PR reviews and issues and so forth. Okay, so I think, is there anyone in the community that would like to say a few words? Going once, twice, 3 times? Okay, let's move on to discussions. And the first discussion we have is over to Taylor with the Go library.
Yeah, so I've talked to Adam a little bit about this, and we're still trying to figure it out. So just technical content warning, this is going to be a little bit of a deep dive into the bowels of the Kubernetes Go clients. So the main thing right now is there is a specific interface called the REST getter or something that we use to construct our Kubernetes client. Now, the reasoning behind this is we need to be able to validate manifest and stuff coming in. But the problem is people who are using it as a Go library generally pass in a client config. That seems to be, or generally it'll be a client set, but we need the client config, and everyone has to generate the client config to get a client set. So we're looking at it, but the only way that I've been able to identify, the types are very close to each other, but there's no really way to compose them with Go, and because Go doesn't have typical inheritance, and I can't override specific methods, it's basically I'm going to have to copy paste some code from the kube control code stuff that makes it all work to kind of write our own type that implements the same interface. And so the two questions I have is, does anyone know if there's another way that you can compose these two different types in Kubernetes? And number two, if there isn't, are we okay with having to pull on that extra burden of basically copy pasting over some code so that we can make it much easier on people who are using it as a client library?
I guess the question is, do we have functional tests covering at least the action package in that case on how it's being implemented? Just at least so we have a functional idea of how it should be or how it's currently consumed? I think we do, right?
Yeah, we have some action tests and things in there.
Okay.
Yeah, the main problem is that the kube control libraries all assume that you have a kube config on disk somewhere, or somewhere where you're going to load it from. And when you're in a Go library, for example, a lot of people who are writing controllers are using an in-cluster config. There isn't necessarily a kube config to go reach out to. And so we don't want to write out a temporary kube config just to read it back in or whatever. So anyway, I'm just wondering if anyone has any ideas, and if not, if we're okay taking on a little bit of copy pasta code to be able to make an easier user experience.
And just to be clear, I only am remembering having implemented this in the past and was looking over some code for this for Helm 2. Are you saying this is basically to avoid having to do re-implement a function like get Helm client?
It's to avoid needing to use because it uses a more obtuse REST client getter. Look up the exact name. It's REST client getter, which is part of the CLI runtime package. And to do that, you need to have an actual kube config location and pass in some context and stuff. And
yeah, I gotcha.
All it's doing on the back end is loading a client config from that. But there's no way to glue the types together because of how they're implemented.
I gotcha.
I'll just quickly post it in chat. This is the particular piece of code that we're actually discussing. So I guess the question is, what kind of use cases are we trying to solve? What's the use case from the consumer's point of view that we're trying to solve? And how can we make that better? It's the approach that I would try to take. As in, if we're trying to create a REST client getter from an in-cluster pod, what's the best way to do that from the SDK standpoint? Or at least to get that. I'm just trying to figure out.
If it's something in-cluster, it should matter, because using the defaults should all work. So it's going to go ahead and load everything again. So there's going to be a little bit of overhead, when you boot up, but the end result should be the same. So they shouldn't even have to pass in any config or a client. It would only be if they're out of cluster and want to point to, and they want to supply a client that is different from their current kube config. So I mean, the edge case of this is pretty small, at least from my understanding.
If we're sure it'll load, I'm perfectly fine with that too. If we're sure, by passing, so that function that I just linked, which is the one where this actually happens, where you have to pass it in. If you pass in a nil, it should use a default that just picks everything up.
Yeah, that's exactly what Tiller did.
Yeah.
Tiller ran in cluster and just passed nil.
Yeah. So as long as we're okay with that, then I'm fine, and we can keep it that way. I just wasn't sure what kind of experience we wanted to create for people. I don't know if there's any other use cases where people want to pass in their config and not have to latch off of a default. because the thing I've heard most is the in-cluster config thing, but I don't know if other people are passing in other kinds of contexts.
Yeah, the issue, like why we need that object is just because of all the, just for context for everybody, is we need more than just a Kubernetes client. You know, a lot happens when like kube control loads the config. It's setting up cache directories and putting all the defaults in, as well as flags for like the builder and resource stuff in addition to the client. So there's a lot more that goes into this because we're using the builder, which has the dynamic clients and all that built in. And it is accepting an interface. It's just a little bit heavy of an interface. So that could be another option, is looking at that. Or maybe having override options like lower down based on specific dependencies consumed based on action. But that's just going to get like really hairy.
I think what we do then, just so we don't take too much more time, I think we can just leave it as it is. We'll need to document that if you're using it, especially like an in-cluster config, that you just pass nil when you're constructing that kube client. And then if there's anyone who watches this recording or who is on the call and goes back and says, hey, this won't work for X, Y, or Z reason, please let us know as soon as possible, because if we do have to make some changes, they might be breaking changes to that API. And so we'll need to know. So if there's anyone out there who's doing it, I think we just give us some feedback. Otherwise, I think what Adam's saying is correct. So then we'll be fine. We should be able to just load it without too much extra work on the part of a consumer of the library.
So do we need to provide, if we don't have it, do we need to provide documentation around this area?
Yeah, we need to document that with the, like, how to use that as a lot. I don't think we have like a specific documentation right now of how to use Helm as a Go library. So we should probably add that in before we hit final 3.0.
And for somebody who's gone through it in the dark last week or this week, yeah, I reverse engineered the code to get it to work. So
yeah, it's not documented.
Not ideal, but it's live.
Designed all the way.
Yeah. So I suppose if we want to go down the road, I suppose we have to document it somehow. Yeah. Okay. Before I move on to next discussion, I'm just going to jump to assignments. Who would like to do notes next week?
I can do
Matt or Scott? Who said yes first?
Oh, Matt Fisher said yes. I was going to, but I can do it another week.
I did the silent raise. I just raised my hand.
Okay. Thank you, Matt Fisher is on notes. Scott, you want to go for moderator, or who wants to do moderator?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So back to discussions quickly, and on to Jacob to talk about the Helm testing proposal.
Hey, so I filed an issue to describe what I've seen as like some of the major features that I'd like to have supported in Helm 3 for Helm test. And this is also kind of in line with some of the features that would be really nice to have out of the chart testing project. But so after examining some of those features, it seemed like potentially the best user experience is to continue on with the annotations-based, Helm hook annotation-based API for defining tests and behavior around things like cleanup. So if you read the issue, it goes through what those features are that we'd like to add, a couple of the breaking changes, including, like Michelle mentioned, removing the test failure hook and renaming test success to just test, which makes it easier to use the hook annotations alongside other hooks, because we always know that a test should succeed. Then there are a few new features like defining tests as jobs, defining supporting resources for tests, like you can already do for other hooks, that we would basically get for free if we combine the implementation for running tests with the execution of other hooks. So there are a bunch of things that we can add as new features in 3.x releases. The main things that we would need to do if we wanted to accept this proposal and move forward with it are to deprecate test failure in Helm 2, as well as test success, or maybe provide a note. We wouldn't deprecate test success in Helm 2, but that would be deprecated in 3. And then for Helm 3, we would need to launch, we'd want to launch with the shared implementation of testing with hooks. So that would give us the jobs as tests and the supporting resources, as well as the cleanup behavior shared with tests, with other hooks. So that's it. One of the other things discussed in Michelle's testing proposal was moving to a different abstraction for defining tests, with the idea being that we would be able to extend and add more features to testing and not be tied to the implementation details or the API of other Helm hooks. I just haven't been able to think of any use cases where we would need to do something in test so far that we wouldn't also want to be, that wouldn't be a really nice thing to have for other Helm hooks, like rich log output and events, things like that. So if there are use cases that I'm not thinking of or haven't listed out that may be difficult to support with the hooks API, this would be, we would want to know about them as soon as possible. Yeah, that's it.
The proposal looks great. The main thing that scares me is doing a major shift in proposals this late. Can we get this done and not, we can't slip Helm 3 past Helm Summit. That would be kind of a catastrophe. So,
well, the good thing is, like I mentioned, the minimal thing that we need to release for Helm 3 is combining the implementation for Helm test with other hook executions. So that should be, like, the work is already done for other hooks, right? Or at least if there's anything we need to update, it already has to be done for Helm 3. So that part is fairly minimal, I think. And then the other features I've talked about can be added in 3.x releases.
Yeah, I think that might be the best approach, because so that's what we've been trying to do, paring down a lot of the features in 3.0 just to make sure that we hit the timeline that we want to do for 3.0. Would just be taking a good hard look at some of the proposals like on there that might be just easy feature additions that we can add to the SDK in a backwards compatible fashion in the future. Yep. So if we can do the underlying infrastructure to make that happen, then I think that would be the best path forward. And then we can, if you're interested in doing the rest of the work in terms of like making tests work for jobs and different things like that are in the proposal, assuming those are a backwards compatible change, then we can get those in post 3.0 and we can just make the minimum viable for 3.0 what needs to be done.
Yep.
To make that work.
And I can help with these changes so that we can get them done in order for the alpha release.
Awesome.
And Jacob, this is Henry. Do I read your proposal correctly that you're proposing that we would be backward compatible with V1 charts, albeit if you used the old annotation, we'd give a warning? Do I read that correctly?
For test success, yes. Part of the proposal is to completely remove test failure.
Yeah.
That simplifies a lot of stuff, and it's also, just as far as I can tell, at least on public GitHub, almost not used.
Almost nobody uses that. Yeah.
So the way that would manifest is like test failure would then become like an unrecognized hook in Helm 3, and there was just like if you have verbose output, there's a warning that says like, oh, this hook is not recognized.
Right. So you'd know it when you ran your test, basically, that it was 1 out of 20 or whatever, or some private one we don't know about. Okay.
Yeah.
It's pretty good to me.
Destructive action.
Okay, anyone else want to add anything on the Helm test? Okay, we're just over the hour. One small thing left, and it's a question from me. It's more confusion on my half. With the merging of PRs, are we doing 2 look goods to me, or is it 1 look goods to me for small, medium, and then 2 for bigger to medium?
Medium is on Helm 2, so it's different between Helm 2 and Helm 3 right now. So Helm 2 stuff, if it's a small, it's just 1 maintainer. If it's a medium, it's up to the first maintainer who goes to review it. If they think that they should have a second review, then they say that. And then for large and above, it's 2 reviewers. For Helm 3, what we've been having some confusion on is no matter what, it's 2 reviewers. I personally think we should change that for bug fixes, even in Helm 3 right now, but we can bring up that discussion next week. But right now it's 2 for any PR into Helm 3, just because the idea is we want to make sure all the maintainers know what's going on and what comes in. So that's the rules on those that we've been following.
Yeah, we can push it over to next week because I know Matt Farina has a comment on that too. Okay, we're 4 minutes over the hour. I don't want to let it known that Irish people keep delaying conversation. So thank you very much for everyone today. Thanks for joining, and have a great weekend.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.